Hi everybody. So this is a video I've been meaning to record for quite a while. It's going to be about my experience leaving a big software company to work for a startup. It's going to be a little bit about product management, a little bit about the Gravity Sketch product itself, and some personal reflections on making big risky moves like that. I always do this unedited, so forgive me for that, but it's the most efficient way to do it. So the background is I qualified as a naval architect and I worked in software companies for the last 20 odd years, and most of them sort of leading in their field. And then I ended up in 2008 in a large software company based out of the UK called Aviva. It's very successful and it has sort of the best industrial software for designing power stations, chemical plants, shipyards, ships. Sorry. So I would say what I would describe as a good career path there. I moved from Germany to be in the headquarters. I moved up a few ranks there, made a good network. I moved back to Germany, and I was still able to hold a relatively senior position. And ironically, just before I left to the startup, I had a product director position. So this was a first promotion I'd had in a few years. This was after COVID. There was not much happening in COVID. So I had this great new job. It was actually the reason I'd moved to Viva in the first time, to look after their product lifecycle management software. And it was essentially a senior product owner, or product manager, sorry. And I'd never worked directly as a product manager before. I've got the big product manager's desk reference there. I was quite interested in the craft of product management. I felt Aviva needed that, more professional product managers. But I'd never worked as one. I never executed on the sprints and in the product increments directly. I'd always been an advisor or a product strategy manager or somebody a level above product management. So I felt slightly uncomfortable to do that, although I knew the product lifecycle management area pretty well. It was old experience for me. It was about 10 years or 14 years since I'd worked with PLM products directly. But I was probably the right person for the job. I had the experience of Aviva's products. I knew some of their industries inside and out. Could present well, all these kind of things. It took a long time to get the team in place. I was a little bit frustrated by that, but during the time when we were setting up this new role and a new team, a recruiter through HR contacted me and said, would I like to work for Gravity Sketch? So a little bit more background, I'd worked in Aviva in a role as head of innovation, where I ran a small team developing, at that time, augmented and virtual reality applications, and I loved it. I felt that technology had a huge potential to impact ship design or plant design or the industries that we worked in. And we did a good job. Our app is on the Microsoft App Store, and we did some pioneering things. I loved that job. But unfortunately, Aviva grew through acquisition. It went through a major reverse merger with Schneider Electric Software, and I lost that role to another team who were looking after that. So I was always a bit disappointed by that, because I loved working in the XR space. So when Gravity Sketch came along, it was this product I knew, a product that I really liked. I'd seen how they've grown over time and become successful. I really wanted to do it. I had a long talk to my partner, who's always supported me on these kind of career decisions. And she's like, go for it. She's Greek, so she's kind of got that attitude of just go for it. You only live once. So I took a 20,000 euro pay cut and added a whole lot of risk by moving to a startup. And I had a couple of interviews. I told the founder and the head of engineering that I'm not a very established product manager, but I know the XR space. I know how to sell to enterprises. And I'm a good people person. And I was hoping that would be enough. They did warn me. They said, you're not the typical kind of profile would hire, but we'll give you a shot. So I went in fully knowing the risks that I might not survive the probationary period. Uh, yeah, it was a massive risk I took. I knew it. And yeah, when I joined, I did a week of onboarding. It was super exciting. It was first of all a company, working in VR. It was well respected in the industry. Their customers were Adidas, Nike, Porsche, BMW, Tesla. Like really cool design customers. Uh, so I really loved, the fact that I'd kind of made it into that company. To be honest. After the first week, I did a customer trip with Shay, the CEO, one of the founders, and a couple of sales guys. And I felt like such a twat. I felt old. I felt not correctly dressed. In fact, I did even buy new trainers, even to go to that business meeting. I don't know if I bought Adidas ones. I think I bought something neutral. Um, but I felt like such a twat. I felt really imposter syndrome. Anyway, amazing day at Adidas. It was the first time we'd been there since COVID. I learned a lot. Had very interesting industry in some respects, and I've started to see the similarities to other businesses I'd worked in. It's effectively design and manufacturing company, but making products for consumers instead of the engineered to order industry of ships. And I saw that they loved the product, but the Gravity Sketch was like struggling to get real traction with the product. Like they had people who were trying it and prototyping it, so quite typical in a startup. I've learned since then. Yeah, so that was a really good start. Followed by a week in Mykonos with the team, learning more about the process, having a really good time. Really nice young team. I still felt massive imposter syndrome. And I gradually got kind of rolled into the product management role. One of the challenges I had was that my team was the geometry team. So a brilliant team of very smart mathematicians. But geometry as a product was a really hard concept for me to get my head around. How do I manage the geometry product? It's like an underlying technology. So that was the first problem, and I should have pushed back more on that. I was like, it's not really a product as such. You have a 3D product, the VR product, you have a 2D product, and you have like a web product, and they were the products for me. But anyway, got to know the geometry team. It was very complex, difficult to understand features that they were working on, subdivision surfaces and rendering and textures and all these kind of things. But the team were very good. They really supported me. I quickly made friends with all the customer support, customer success managers who were dealing with the customers. And yeah, it was an amazing business. Basically, the amazing thing about Gravity Sketch was that I could attend a training session with 5 designers from Volkswagen and a trainer, and I could observe how customers used the product fully remotely, but in a way with a fidelity that you can only really get with other products when you're observing people face to face. The whole idea of Gravity Sketch still fascinates me. It was amazing to see how these designers were creating little showrooms and areas where they could show off their products. Gravity ran workshops with students, design competitions with big automotive companies, and the way people use this product is just mind-blowing. It still is today. As I said, I've worked in the CAD industry for 20 years, and CAD software for a very long time, at least in shipbuilding, has been co-creation or concurrent engineering. So you can, thousands of people literally in Korean shipyards work on the same ship at the same time. And he was, but in an asynchronous way. So you do your work, you check it into a database, and then other people can see it. And I'd always believed the future was like real-time collaboration. So here was Gravity Sketch doing basically what Miro have done for whiteboards by having real-time multiplayer. And yeah, for me, that was a game changer. It allowed the designers who were still at sort of 2 to 3 days in home office to work collaboratively on projects together, even though they were at home. It allowed design managers to jump into a session, see what people were doing when they're at home. I just think it allowed for a level of communication that you just can't get on 2D screens. But so amazing to be there, amazing product, amazing the way the customers used it. There's me still having sort of severe imposter syndrome, and maybe quite rightly, as I struggled to manage the features that this geometry team were doing. The other thing that was going on was that there were a lot of meetings in Gravity Sketch in a good way, a lot of communication. They used Slack very well. There was like super fast communication about any bug, feature, or a customer saying something good about the product. But we had these town halls which were really good. The founders were very focused and good leaders in the sense that they knew what they wanted, and you don't get that in all big software companies, I can tell you. So I enjoyed those town halls from the fact that everybody knew what they were doing and why they were doing it that week, or bi-weekly or whatever it was. But I noticed that the management were firing like 2 people every week. It just doesn't work out for them, didn't work out for us. And I was like, okay, this is a really, really high turnover company, and I have a very high chance that I don't survive the probationary period. So for the first time, I was like, okay, now I've understood the risk I've taken. Oh shit. I worked almost every day, 12 hours. There were always meetings into the evening because of the US customers. As a product manager, we were going through a phase where they encouraged everybody from all the different business functions to attend as many calls with customers to understand our user as possible. It was very intense. I enjoyed it, but basically didn't see my family for the 6 months that I worked there, and they started to hate me for it. So I'd finish about 9 o'clock, family would be just go to bed, the kids would be going to bed. And the whole time I was just like, what have I done? I'm going to get fired. So amazing journey in many ways because of what the product does. I saw with my own eyes what I believed in, that there would be people designing cars, shoes, airplanes, boats in virtual reality together, in the same space at the same time virtually. I believe so strongly in that at Aviva that it was very confirming to see that here was Gravity Sketch selling this product to hundreds or maybe even thousands of users who were using the product exactly like I thought it should be. Aviva, or let's say VR should be. So that was extremely validating that, okay, the idea that I'd had was coming true and you can make it work. Also Gravity Sketch being probably one of the most used design tools in VR, compared to what Autodesk have or Dassault. They all have a sort of VR mode of their CAD software. Gravity Sketch was used by hundreds and hundreds of users every day for hours and hours on end. The statistics were amazing. There were people, thousands of hours in the tool. And so from a kind of career perspective, personal perspective, I kind of validated these thoughts, and I'd seen it with my own eye how people were doing it. There were some good aspects to the rest of the time there. So I'd started to work with customers on their kind of data pipelines. How did they go from mechanical CAD into Gravity Sketch? It's something I knew a lot about from Aviva times. Worked a little bit on this concept of metaverse. Volkswagen, for example, wanted this like showroom to show off all their legacy designs. Loved that idea. And as I said, got on very well with the CSMs and customers, made some network there. And I think there were some people in the company that at least respected what I did and the way I tried to do it. Ultimately, I fully understand the decision of the founders. They were pushing more into project management, which is definitely not my thing. And really just expecting me to manage the day-to-day project execution of the projects which the founders had come up with. My expectation at the same time as I grew in confidence was I wanted to influence the product strategy, which is what I've been doing the last 10 years. And yeah, basically I started to butt heads with their CTO and to an extent the head of engineering. where I had pretty strong conviction around the way they were doing collaboration, that they should use a web client and not a Unity executable. I just know that it's not acceptable in Volkswagen, for example. And other people were doing it, but I basically got this answer like, that's impossible, we will never do it. I worked also on geometry simplification. Some of it the geometry team did themselves, and some of it I'd come across this company Pixis, which is part of Unity actually, and I was like, why don't we implement this in our pipeline? Again, I got impossible, never going to happen. And I'm laughing because my colleague at the time who also got fired the same week as me, he wrote to me and said, "I guess what, they've implemented that Pixis pipeline." So, yeah, I can have my personal victories on these kind of things. I can't really blame the founders and the team at the time for letting me go. I think it was short-sighted. I probably would have been a good product manager in the end. And yeah, again, not personal victories is bittersweet. I don't think Gravity's doing too well revenue wise. I think it was always going to be a challenge. You know, they got this Series A, 25 million or something dollars, and you have this expectation of growth. And I was looking at this and how can you grow at the speed of a mobile application type of startup or a web startup when you've got to persuade people to buy a headset first to use your product, a VR headset. So I knew there was a massive challenge to get to that. I think they didn't do their 2D strategy in hindsight quick enough. I think they're doubling down on that maybe now. They're maybe even looking at their iPad app again, but loads of problems, and it's very easy to criticize in hindsight. But yeah, so ultimately it was a really exciting time of my life. I learned so much. Literally the 6 months felt like 3 years in any other company. It's still in my mind is 3 years. There's so much that happened, so many meetings, so many interactions, so many decisions, so many discussions that happened in 6 months that it was essentially three years in any other company. Learned so much. A lot of it will stick with me. In fact, I left. After I left, I had a few months unemployed, and then I found a job in another startup in the shipbuilding industry, completely different style, corporate startup, less stressy. But I've taken so many good lessons with me about product market fit, about being clear in terms of your goals and your missions. All these kind of things, really, really important lessons that have made me a much better product manager, ironically. But on the other hand, it was an extremely stressful time. I would even go so far to say that at times it was quite a toxic work environment. I had this discussion with colleagues where it became clear that if you didn't toe the company line, or that's not quite the way I would say, but if you didn't agree with the founders, you would be fired. And I don't think that was intentional from the founders, and really do that consciously. Of course, they didn't want to fight people internally. They wanted people who would help them build the future as they saw it, which is, I understand that from a founder's perspective. But there was this kind of toxic environment. I think they lost a lot of good people through that, where basically you weren't allowed to voice your opinions. And it's something I still don't know what's the right answer. Is it good to listen to those people and adjust your plans? Or is it good to stick to your guns and be focused on your execution strategy? Me personally, I think I would listen to the people and be a bit more agile. That's my nature. I'm quite a flexible person. But on the other hand, I did appreciate working for Shay, who had a very laser focused vision. And I think he was open to changing his mind about how to execute. And but yeah, looking at the company now, they've been through a few head of sales, and I know they lost a lot of people. Or they had to downsize just because their runway wasn't very long. So I don't know what the right answer is. No, nobody knows in this case. Anyway, yeah. How does it feel 2 years kind of down the line? Yeah, I had this huge trauma at Gravity Sketch. I had the imposter syndrome, which wasn't was partially justified, but not fully. It's like people say that you get this feeling you don't know anything, but you have to remember why you're there in the first place. One of the things that happened that was interesting was I had 2 calls with the people from the investors in Gravity Sketch, and they said, you're hired because they need experienced people. Don't forget that. And these people have only had like one job before they've started this company. Most of them are in their 20s, and they just don't know what you know. And in retrospect, I think there were a few situations where I should have been more stubborn and stood my ground a bit and said, no, look, I think you're wrong here. It may have accelerated my demise, but I think that's, if I were to do it again, I would have stood my ground on a few issues. So that was a big learning. Yeah, so imposter syndrome. Afterwards, I felt devalued. You know, I can't even work for a startup. I didn't feel really humbled. I just felt like a waste of space. I felt kind of, you know, what's my place on the earth? Am I too ambitious? Am I better than I think I am? All these kind of doubts went through my mind. I was lucky enough to go to this company where I work just now, which is doing really interesting things with AI, energy efficiency. It's got its own struggles, which I'll talk about in another video. But ultimately, it took another 20K pay cut to be here, more or less. And I feel, more than anything else, I feel really stupid for initially taking that chance and the risk, because I'm missing out on about 2,000 every month for over 2 years now, 3 years, let's say, which is a lot of money. And I'm thinking now seriously about my family's future. Like, we were even thinking that could we do holidays? Okay, we're in a very fortunate position that we can take holidays with the 4 of us abroad, every year, and sometimes more than one. But I'm now like, that's not sustainable anymore with the current economy. So I feel like, more than anything, I feel like, in retrospect, it wasn't worth it. Sorry to be demotivating here. I think it really depends, first of all, what stage you are in life. So if I was 10 years younger, I definitely should have done it. If I was 20 years younger, absolutely no questions, immediately, not even think about it. But when you're late 40s and you have a family, responsibilities, is it the best thing to do? Is it worth it to learn a little bit about working for a startup? Is it worth it to validate some ideas that you've got yourself? Probably yes, if you're selfish, but I think if you're a family person, this huge instinct to look after your family is really strong, and I feel like it was ultimately the wrong decision. However, it's in the past. I've got to make the most of it. I'd love to use the knowledge and skills that I've got from going through that transition in other ways. I guess the fact is I will be permanently changed by the experience I had at Gravity Sketch. I hope. I've been discussing with a guy on LinkedIn, sorry I can't remember your name just now, but he's a former Autodesk, maybe been through some similar pain, but I still feel like there's this huge potential for real-time collaboration, real-time working together in digital spaces. So I'd still feel very inspired by that, and the fact that Gravity Sketch had a business actually making that happen in many major automotive design companies and footwear design companies, that's still a miracle for me. And I will talk about that story and what I've seen in every other job I ever have. Hopefully I can work back in the 3D space a little bit more than I do today, but yeah, that left a lasting impact. But yeah, think carefully about your decision. It depends what age you are and how much time you've got to recover from it. So here I am 2 years, 3 years down the line, essentially recovering from that decision. If you're lucky, you will have a job during that recovery. If you're lucky, it might even be a better job and with reasonable pay. But it can happen that you drop some serious thousands off your salary, and you have to sort of recover from that financially as well. For that to take quite a long time. So think about it carefully. Depends what stage you are in your life. I think if you want to make that kind of decision, the learnings are immense. I'm really keen actually to go back to Aviva and take the learnings I've got from running startups or being in startups, doing innovation, doing difficult things. That was, to be honest, that was almost my goal, was to learn how to run an innovation or a company within a company, and then to go back to a larger company and make that successful, because that's going to be fun, right? So that's it from me. I hope you learned something from this. Slightly traumatic experience, but ultimately you got to make the most of it, whatever you do. Cheers for now. Bye bye.